So I think by now you all realize that a bladder cancer diagnosis can be life-threatening and life-changing, and treatments, recovery, surveillance, cancer monitoring, they can create chaos in your life. They can create anxiety. There is such a thing as scanxiety. Before you go for your scan, people get anxious. I'm really delighted that we brought some neighbors in from slightly north, the doctors from Atlanta's Emory University Winship Cancer Center. I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Vikram Narayan. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Urology at Emory University, and he also serves as the director of urologic oncology at Grady Memorial Hospital. Dr. Shreyas Joshi is also an assistant professor and the director of the bladder cancer program in the Department of Urology at Winship Cancer Center. And they're going to highlight some common issues and some research that's been done to help mitigate some of those problems that they've found, and really talk a little bit about the new normal after bladder cancer. They're going to suggest some tips and modifications that can help. And they brought with them an expert in this, Mr. Bill Robertson, who has been one of their patients. And he's going to share his experience too, because we all are experts in your own situation. And some of the tips that Mr. Robertson has used might be beneficial to you. But think about all of the things that you'll be hearing today and how you can incorporate them into fit your journey. And I'm going to slide this back so the people on the side will be able to see better.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that really nice introduction. I'm Vikram Narayan, one of the urologists, urologic oncologists at Emory. Joined here with Bill, one of my patients, and my partner in crime, Shreyas Joshi, who also directs our bladder cancer program. We want this to really be kind of an interactive and engaging session, and really wanted to talk about some of the things that, to be perfectly honest, as physicians, we often don't think about immediately when we're thinking about a patient that's come into our office with a new bladder cancer diagnosis, what that means for the patient and what that means for that patient's life. And so part of what we want to do today is really unpack that and think about, it's great to see all of you here, really looking for your engagement as well, and hopefully we'll have some opportunity here to kind of open up the floor for some discussion. So I wanted to start off by talking about, and the next couple slides are really Dr. Joshi's slides, so credit to him for really kind of putting this together. But really, when we think about the arc of bladder cancer, it's not just being diagnosed and then being treated and then it's over. There's really a lifelong journey once you get treated or diagnosed with bladder cancer. And we know this begins even before you're diagnosed, when you're having symptoms of bladder cancer, which maybe at the time you didn't know were symptoms of bladder cancer, and you're anxious about those symptoms. And maybe you go see one or two doctors or medical providers, and you're treated for something else before the diagnosis of bladder cancer actually comes about. I think we'll talk about that with Bill here.
Oh, yeah.
And then we get into treatment, but then after treatment, there's follow-up. Stephanie mentioned scanxiety. There may be additional treatments you need. You may experience complications, and then there's, of course, surveillance of your disease. So really, all of these areas are touch points with the medical system, but they also influence your lives in ways that, physicians and those who are helping care for you may not always think about, and it's really important for us as a community to think about that. So when we broadly look at quality of life issues for bladder cancer patients, these really can be kind of grouped into multiple domains. So there's obviously the physical parts of this, and those are the ones that, are often the ones that your doctor is most aware of. Things like, okay, you're having blood in your urine, you're having pain after your TURBT, maybe you're having an issue with an ostomy, or you're dealing with catheters, or, physical domains. But there's also mental quality of life issues that are often unspoken or not directly addressed. And these can be related to things like urinary function, sexual function. We're going to talk about both of those a little bit later on. But they can also, span financial kind of issues as well. Some of that was discussed at one of the earlier sessions. And all put together, there can be a significant psychological burden. I think everybody in this room probably, as you're reflecting on your own experiences, probably can relate to that being true. And then there's survivorship issues that you can, these domains, you can think about them as domains that are one way when you're getting treatment, and then they shift to being something completely different after treatment. So when we're thinking about contextualizing quality of life and survivorship, we can try to put these in a few different sort of categories. And, again, Dr. Joshi really nicely put together this framework for studying this, which I think the first one would be things that we as surgeons and physicians do to affect patients' quality of life. And then there's things that happen to patients that we can influence, and we're going to go over each of these. And then there are things that happen to patients that we cannot influence. And so these are kind of the three sort of ways we can contextualize survivorship issues as it relates to bladder cancer. So I want to start with Bill here. And, Bill and Millie are actually both here. I don't want to, I think Millie has some stage fright, so she's staying over there. But, I want to start off so first of all, Bill, I really appreciate you, joining us this afternoon and being so willing to share your personal story with the group. So thank you for that. And so Bill and I have known each other now for quite some time. And I wanted to ask you, Bill, can you tell us just kind of a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What do you do for work? Just to kind of introduce yourself to the group here.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Bill Robertson. Full disclosure, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on the internet or TV. Okay, I'm a cancer survivor, and I take that statement very seriously about being a survivor. They were talking about today surviving versus thriving, and I'm in that category that I'm thriving because I live each and every day like it's my last day, and I live it to the fullest. Prior to being diagnosed with cancer, I was actually, I was a long-haul truck driver. I actually moved windmill blades. So I was all over the country, and so it was very fun, very exciting. And after surgery and after the diagnosis, I am now officially retired because I can no longer do that. But that's okay. It doesn't mean that. One of the things that I did learn from this is that even though bladder cancer is life-changing, it doesn't mean you stop living. You still live each day like it really does become the norm, your new norm, and you learn how to adjust, and you just live, and you just make the necessary adjustments so that you can live your life and be satisfied with living in your life. So that's kind of like how I approach it. Okay, yeah. And as we go further on, I'll give you some more of my philosophy, so to say.
Bill, thanks for sharing this. So can you tell us a little bit about, how were you first diagnosed with bladder cancer? I mean, how did that come about? What were the symptoms you were having? When did you realize something was wrong?
I was actually out on the road in Nebraska and got blood appeared in my urine. And it turned out it was a UTI, and I wound up in the hospital for a couple of days because I was like delirious, out on the road. My wife actually, because of the technology that's on my truck and with my cell phone, that's how she was able to find me, because I didn't call her that evening to tell her that I had parked for the day. So, and I was in the hospital and I didn't even know who I was. And it was just an interesting story that when I actually started to wake up and kind of get some sense of what was going on, and the lady had said to me, she had asked me what state I was in, and I didn't know. And she said that you were in Nebraska. And I looked out the window and I said, no, we can't be in Nebraska because there's no mountains. Now, if you've ever been to Nebraska, Nebraska is as flat as it can get, so you can kind of see where I was. It took a couple of days, but that was how we first found out that, so they treated me for a UTI. I came home, stayed home for a couple of weeks, saw my primary care provider, and they put me on an antibiotic. Things cleared. went back out on the road, and I was out on the road a week, and the blood came back. And so I called my doctor. We wound up coming back to Georgia, and we went to she referred me over to a urologist, and then in turn, that's when we went to a urologist, had the first, what do you call it? The
Cystoscopy.
yeah, they had the first cystoscopy, and
Yeah.
then from there, we discovered that, I had cancer. Actually, the results came in that Friday afternoon, and me and my wife, we sat at home because it was on my chart, and we're going through, and I'm rereading the results, and she's got her phone, and she's looking up the big words, and then she goes, "It's going to be cancer." I go, "Oh, okay, it's going to be cancer."
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, what was going through your mind when you saw those? I think that's a really common thing today. Is for folks to get results from their doctor's office, automatically released. And so obviously you probably hadn't, you were Googling stuff. Your wife was Googling stuff. Can you talk about a little bit about what was going through your mind and what were you thinking at that time?
Well, at that moment, when you hear the word cancer, I mean, you really begin to focus on the little things that were like important to you, because all of a sudden it was like you have heard this word cancer, and it was like you've been hit with a death sentence, that this is it, and you start thinking, how much more time do I have, and things of that nature, and then you want to try to figure out, well, what's my other options, and things of that nature. So at that initial diagnosis of being diagnosed with cancer, I wasn't at that time with Dr. Narayan with the team at Emory. I was actually with another hospital facility there in Georgia, and that's when we first started with the process with the TRBGs, and we wound up doing 4 of those.
Right.
Before I actually
Yeah.
came to Emory. So by the time I got to Dr. Narayan, my case was like a train wreck. It really was. It was a train wreck. But he figured it out. And
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably also worth mentioning at this point that when we first met, first thing we did was try and take a step back.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, we need to stage you. It's not just you were having blood in your urine. Initially, we thought it was a UTI. You've had a bunch of cystoscopies and TURBTs. And so I think my recollection was we sat down in the office and said, we should get a CT scan. Let's get a CT scan of your chest. Let's get a CT scan of your abdomen and pelvis. Can you talk a little bit about what happened thereafter?
So we did a CT scan, and then we did a PET scan as well. And it's just kind of interesting. You say CT, okay, I know what a CT scan is. So, but when he said PET scan, I'm like, what the heck is that?
Right. So
quite naturally, you're Googling, and you're trying to figure this out. What in the world's PET scan going on? And you're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and you're reading, and you're going, so they're going to inject some radioactive material. What is?
Yeah.
So you're trying to wrap your mind around that, and then also because of the fact that being a type 2 diabetic, and it's like, okay, so for them to do this, they're going to give me a chemical that has sugar in it, and so I'm like, so how's that going to play out? And the guy, the tech, he was like, okay, you got to make sure that you don't eat anything before you come to town. Make sure you take your meds, because we got to have your sugar as low as possible, because we're going to give you sugar. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to work out real well, But as you begin to understand the process, that it was actually, and I had no idea until I started researching it, the fact that sugar adheres to cancer. Right. So it's like, what an interesting concept. Who knew?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I know one of the reasons we got the PET scan was because I noticed in one of your original studies that your other doctor had gotten that there was a spot on your kidney.
Right.
And that had not really been looked at in further detail. So one of the things that I was immediately worried about was that, did your cancer actually, had it spread to your kidney, which would be an unusual location for bladder cancer to go to. so, of course, I want you to kind of share with the group sort of what we found and kind of what was going through your mind as we were, really, because I really want to focus on sort of your perspective on this, because obviously I can recite your story, having reviewed your chart carefully and having written your chart. But what's more important is the part that is not said in the chart, which is what you were thinking, right? Because I think that's really informative.
Yeah. After prior to coming to Emory, I had the discussion. Like I said, I was with Wellstar at the time, and one of the discussions that I'd had, because we were now at my third
TRBT.
TRBT. Yeah, we'd already done that 3 times, and it was kind of one of those things that you kind of like. I had sat down and first I kind of had a conversation with myself. Okay, what are we going to do here? And it's like I got to have a game plan, and I got to have like an end game, so to say. That as my wife sometimes she says, the military just programmed you one way and one way only. It's that here's point A, here's point B, get me there. That was just my thing. Here's point A, this is where I'm at, this is where I need to get to, and how do I get there? So I got to come up with a plan. So the first thing was I actually sat down and had that heart-to-heart with my doctor. Okay, how many times are we going to do this that you feel that, okay, I've done all I can do, and now I'm going to refer you to someplace else? And so when he had said, okay, we're going to do this one more time, because the first, we did it once, and we did it once, everything was fine. We did it the second time, things got a little complicated because I wound up getting clogged, so we had to go in for an emergency surgery because I came home on a Thursday. Sunday, I'm back in ER. Monday morning, we're in for emergency surgery again because I was clogged, and then we're going to scrape again. So it was just like, and we were just getting to the point, it's like, you know what, Doc? I'm really like, where are we going with this? Because this is just becoming overwhelming, and I'm walking around with the catheter, and I'll tell you what I learned as a catheter. If you are a fisherman, you know what the fish feels like now when you get him on the hook. Trust me, you know what a fish feels like when you get him on the hook if you're walking around with the catheter. Okay? I mean, you got to find some humor in this thing to keep you going. You got to laugh and you got to smile about it. So after that third time, when I walked around with a catheter for 3 weeks, and I told my wife, says, I'm going into the doctor's and they're going to take the catheter out on Friday. And she goes, yeah, I says, I get a weekend pass because on Monday, I have another procedure, and I'm going to have another catheter. So it's like, oops, like a weekend pass. What am I going to do? Because I don't know. We'll go walk. So we wound up going downtown and just walk, did some window shopping because I don't have a catheter. I can just go walking, but it was like nice for the weekend. But then we did it the 4th time, and once again he comes in and you get the same news that I didn't get it all. That is like a punch in the gut. Okay, what are we going to do now? So at that point, he had transferred. He goes, I'm going to refer your case to Emory. So when I sat down with Dr. Narayan, he kind of knew he had gone through, and I was like, okay, so what are we going to do here? What's your game plan? And he was like, well, we're going to go in, we're going to look one more time, and we're going to see what we can get, and then we're going to sit back and we're going to figure out what we're doing. And then so after he did his scraping, and it was like, okay, I didn't get it all. Another punch in the gut, not a problem. But he then was like, okay, so what do we do from here? And he was like, well, we could do this another 4 or 5 more times, and eventually we'll get it all. But the flip side of that is, chances are within 2 years you'll be back, and we'll be doing this again. And I was just like, no, we're not doing this again. So what are the other options? And he was like, well, the other option is that we would have your bladder removed. But before we go to that step, let's deal with the other issues. We got a spot on your kidney that we need to look at, and we have a spot on your lung that we need to look at. Okay, fine. So we first went to the kidney, and it turns out that was cancer, so I wound up losing the right kidney. Yeah, lost the right kidney, and woke up in the hospital. Doctor comes in, he goes, so how you doing? And I just kind of looked at him and go, you didn't tell me you were going to roll me out in the back alley and have Mike Tyson come beat up on me for 2 hours. Because that's literally what it felt like. I mean, you just had no idea what it was going to feel like to actually go in, because he was like, yeah, you know, because I'm thinking you're going to take my kidney, so you're going to, you know, I'm going to have an incision on the back. These little, and you wake up and say, all of this is just killing me, and you land there, and it's like you land in the hospital, and the nurses are coming in, but what I can say is that coming from one system where, hospital system where they're not as geared towards cancer the way Emory is, like night and day when it comes to the nurses and things of that nature, night and day. So it's really important that as you become your advocate, because you're gonna have to become your own advocate for yourself, that you really look into the facilities that you're about to go and embark upon, because this is a major decision, and it's a lot of backroom pieces that don't really get explained to you, but you wound up experiencing as you go through the process. So yeah.
So when you were going through all of that, you know, thinking about the different TURBTs you had, you know, I'm sitting there offering you basically kind of a radical choice between losing your bladder, also losing your kidney. You know, there must have been a point at which you were thinking to yourself, you know, how do I know this is the right thing to do? There must have been a time where you were thinking to yourself, I mean, obviously you put a lot of trust in me and our team, but were there resources, or, you know, was there family you turned to? Can you talk a little bit about, like, at home after you left the visit, you know, what were some of the conversations like?
Well, as a as a minister, you tend to lean on faith, okay?
Right.
And it was kind of interesting that my wife, bless her heart, sometimes, you know, I know that it's about to come when the conversation starts with, "Hey, Reb," it's kind of like, oh, okay, here it comes. So she says to me, "Hey, how many hours have you spent at the hospital praying with other people when they're going through? How many times did your phone ring and you would get up, and because this family's going through whatever it is, and you're willing to give them your time, you're willing to pray for them? How many times?" And I would go, "Yeah, countless." She goes, "Well, guess what? Now it's your turn. Now you need to get in that line." And so she was like, "You need to let people know what's going on in your life so that they can begin praying for you." And so it was our prayer that I didn't pray for a healing. All I asked God for was to give me the right doctors at the right time. And I would trust God from that point on. So when the first time I got to Emory to meet with Dr. Narayan, and Dr. Narayan says, "I've got a team," and I'm thinking, a team? What do I do? I didn't, and my wife leans and goes, "Right doctor at the right time." I go, "Okay, right doctors at the right time." And it was kind of like Dr. Ryan, you know, and he had told me, he says, you know, he goes, your case is, he goes, "it's kind of complicated, and I want to bring it before the board, and we want to discuss your case." And I'm like, he's like, "Can I have your permission?" I go, yeah, you do what you need to do. And so at that point, it was like, okay, we need to talk about your kidney. We need to get a lung guy. And we're talking about to your knee, to a chemo doctor. But I never had to go through chemo. So it was kind of like, I was, you know, not that I was worried about losing my hair, because, you know, hey, I already got that, you know, so I wasn't worried about that. But it was just the fact that all of a sudden I had gone from a scenario where I'm just dealing with one doctor, to now I had a team of doctors that were all banding together for one reason and one reason only, and that was like to make Bill better. And at that point, it was kind of like, okay, I'm making the right steps. But still in your mind, you're going to go through this, did I make the right decision? Is there another way? How does this affect, you know, how does this affect my relationship with my wife? Mm-hmm. Because it was kind of like one of those things, you know what, she didn't sign up for this. you know, that wasn't what she signed up for. But thanks be to God, she's still here. She's still with me, and I thank her each and every day that she was there for me. Because believe me, there were days that I just didn't feel like getting up, and she was like, "You gotta get up. You gotta get up." So, you know, and those were those mornings that, you know, you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're sick on your stomach, and she's like petting me on my head, going, "You're going to be okay." And I'm going, you know, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore. So she was there for me. So, meant a lot, meant a lot.
Thank you for sharing that, Bill. I know that's, you know, really difficult to think about, and we appreciate you being vulnerable here for the group. I think it really helps a lot of folks here that, you know, the experiences that are so personal, which, you know, most folks don't share with others in such a public venue. I think the fact that you're sharing it helps other people. I'm sure there are others in this room who have lived very similar experiences, and I think it's helpful to hear that. And one of the things that Dr. Joshi and I know in caring for patients with bladder cancer is we hear very similar concerns and very similar issues, but only we have those perspectives. And so part of the reason we wanted to do this session was to sort of share to the group that, you know, this is a lived experience for many patients with bladder cancer. I wanted to pivot a little bit now and talk, you know, we're going to dial down into a little bit more into your in-hospital experience. So, you know, going back to this framework that we had kind of introduced earlier, which is, you know, the domains of quality of life, things we do that affect patients' quality of life, things that happen to patients that we can influence, and things that happen to patients that we cannot often influence. So what are some of the things that we do that can affect a patient's quality of life? You mentioned the surgery, waking up feeling, you know, like I beat you up in an alley.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to touch on some of those things. So I think one of the things that I think everyone in this room has probably experienced at some point is that, you know, sleep disturbances are extremely common. And in fact, at MD Anderson, there was a study done that looked at specifically the question of sleep disturbances in patients with bladder cancer and found that it was among the most burdensome symptoms that patients reported, particularly those who had surgery. And, you know, this is kind of from the same paper, the top 5 most burdensome symptoms in the hospital. And you can see disturbed sleep is number 2. Drowsiness and fatigue, they're all kind of the same domain, right? One leads to the other. Dry mouth, very common, post-anesthesia, sometimes medication related, and of course pain. And, you know, thinking about that framework, again, what do we do? What can we influence? Obviously, sleep is something that we directly influence, right?
Oh, yeah.
So sleep deprivation in hospitals, it's not just a problem after cystectomy, it's actually a problem just in general, right? So you're in your recovery area, and then you go to your room, and then someone comes in and wakes you up, starts measuring things. And the machine next to you.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, it's like.
And you know your doctor's not looking at that necessarily at 2
No
o'clock.
doctor, he's not down there at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like.
It's ready for us at 4, but the other thing is, you turn around and the machine starts beeping,
Yeah.
right? The lab draws come in.
Yeah.
There's a number of different things, and they all occur at different times. And this is definitely something that, we started thinking about more as this information started percolating in the lay press. So when I was a fellow, I did some of my training at MD Anderson. One of the things that we did when we were looking at quality improvement initiatives was to really see if we can figure out how we can reduce some of those sleep interruptions that we all cause in hospitals. And so some of you may be familiar with this framework. It's a QI framework, which we refer to as PDSA, which is Plan, Do, Study, Act. So this is not the same kind of research where you're randomizing patients to one or the other. It's basically where you sit down, decide what you're trying to accomplish, come up with some metrics to know that you've improved, and then implement that change and then kind of measure and iterate. And so this is sort of how quality improvement projects are typically done. So, this is kind of what I just said. So what we wanted to do was make a few implementations within patients undergoing radical cystectomy at MD Anderson and essentially assess whether or not those interventions are actually making a difference for patients. So this is something called the Richards-Campbell Sleep Questionnaire. Essentially is actually a validated instrument that has very similar reliability to formal sleep studies. So as you can see, it's a very easy to answer 6-question kind of questionnaire. You can have patients answer it, and then if you were to compare that to putting a patient through a sleep study, they would actually have very similar similar kind of outcomes. And it assesses several domains: sleep depth, sleep latency, which is kind of the idea of when you first fell asleep or how quickly you could fall asleep, whether you woke up in the middle of the night, how easy it was to return to sleep, and then your kind of overall quality of sleep. So one of the things that we did was we looked specifically at the question of lab draws and essentially shifted that so that it would occur not in the middle of the night, but kind of in the very early morning. Now, to provide some context as to why labs are sometimes drawn very early in the morning is because usually decisions have to be made, around that 6 to 7 a.m. time frame so that other things can happen during the day. So if you don't, it usually takes about an hour for labs to return. So, and obviously there's lab technicians that have to go through the entire hospital. So they generally start at, the most acute floors, so intensive care units, things like that, and then they work their way up to the less acute floors. But certainly starting at 2 a.m. did not make a whole lot of sense for us because it's in the middle of the night. Yeah. You don't need the results at 3 a.m. We had debated actually doing it the night before, so doing it at, let's say, 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., but ultimately decided against that because sometimes if abnormal lab values result at that time, then it might potentially disrupt patients' sleep as those things have to get acted on. You can't really sort of sleep on those results. The other thing was to cluster nursing care. So the other part that we realized was that there are different members of the nursing team. There's nurses, nurses assistants, and they all do different things at different times, and it's kind of like they're there for their shift. They're looking at their checklists. Everyone's well-meaning, of course, but they may not necessarily realize that you were just woken up 30 minutes ago to have your lab drawn, and now they're back to check your temperature. Yeah. And if you look at the computer has all these orders clustered at different times, and it's, kind of like they've got to follow the checklist or else they get in trouble. So all of these things can be solved. It just requires somebody to basically sit down and look at that whole thing from start to finish. And you can imagine it involves putting together the phlebotomy team and the lab team. It involves putting together all the different components of the nursing team. And then, of course, the minimization of ambient distraction. So I think at most hospitals now, I'm not going to say all hospitals, they've shifted towards single patient room experiences, but there are still hospitals that have shared rooms. For those of you who've ever stayed in a shared room, if your neighbor's being woken up for something or they're watching TV or whatever, that's distracting to you. So how can we can't obviously tear down every hospital and build it with, we would love to do that, but can't do that. So, providing things like earplugs, eye covers, things like that. So we put all these things together, and essentially our goal was to create a 7-hour kind of period of restful sleep, essentially. That was what we targeted. We said, okay, do you do this? You essentially have no interruptions for the patient for 7 hours. The exception, of course, would be if there was something abnormal that was going on, obviously at the end of the day, you are in a hospital, so if something's going on, you would be woken up. And our goal was to improve patients, specifically amongst patients undergoing cystectomy, so removal of the bladder. I won't get into the details of how we developed the 10% improvement, but we set a baseline of, basically we were going to measure how things were in present state, make the changes, and we wanted to see a minimum of a 10% improvement. And then, obviously we reviewed kind of the changes we tried to do. So, we did this in 2019, so a few years ago, just prior to the pandemic, but essentially asked patients if they would be willing to participate. We got a baseline of sleep hygiene that was occurring in the hospital in this patient population. We also added to that questionnaire kind of an open-ended question to allow folks to basically just add their own thoughts on what was going on with their sleep quality. We then initiated the project, did all the coordination. We had, during evening rounds, the doctors that were going by would provide them with the sleep kits, or the PAs would do that as well. And then we did our assessment thereafter. So I have some data that I can share with you as part of this project. So we had about 33 total patients. 13 were in that pre-intervention period. 19 were in the post-intervention. They all had either open or robot-assisted cystectomy. And what you can see here is that we looked at, these are the different domains. So if you recall from that questionnaire, there had the depth, latency, awakenings, returns. So you can see the domains vary, but there's definitely an improvement, although very slight, post-intervention. Now, didn't reach statistical significance. This was not a, powered to look at statistics in any way. We were just trying to do an iterative quality improvement project. And I'll drill down on some of the responses that we got, because I think it is illuminating. So the first thing we saw was that, if a patient's in the hospital for a longer period of time, their sleep scores went down. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that tells you is that it's not just about some of the things that we changed, right? So the interruptions and those sorts of things drive it somewhat, but obviously if you're having complications, or if you're having, other things that are keeping you in the hospital for a longer period of time, you're likely to have worse sleep. ICU delirium is a known phenomenon, and there's versions of that occur even outside of the ICU. So just the fact that you're in this sort of contained environment, not able to go outside, or maybe not engage, like eating the stale hospital food, all these sort of things that occur, right? We also looked at the Clavian. The Clavian grade refers to the type of it's a way we grade complications. So there's, kind of small complications, and then there's bad complications. And, we didn't actually see significant differences there, but length of stay definitely made a difference. I wanted to share some of the comments from patients during the study period of, kind of what they said they had, why they had trouble sleeping. So there was a patient who said he or she had nausea that interfered with their sleep, pain, as Bill was alluding to, which is certainly a contributor. People coming in, the bed being uncomfortable, and then symptoms, right? So symptoms can definitely do it. We did see after our, and these comments, by the way, spanned both cohorts, so both before and after. You also had, one patient say, nothing in particular, I just couldn't sleep. And, that may map to some of the fact that, they're dealing with the bladder cancer diagnosis, and that contributes as well. Most of the patients who did complain of or raise concerns about sleep did comment on it being primarily related to patient care issues, but you can see some of these other contributing factors which we classified, with pain and nausea being the second most common factor in the hospital. Part of what we also looked at was how well we did keeping ourselves honest in terms of during the study period, how often were the lab draws actually done correctly. And, so we saw a number of areas that we still could improve. Patients sometimes, so this project was done on one floor of the hospital, but if that floor is full, one of the things that sometimes happens in hospitals, patients get moved to a different floor, and then, they're not part of the project. So that apparently happened quite a bit. So, you have to sort of show proof of concept and then really sell it. I'm happy to report that I know, at least at MD Anderson, that, the lab draws and everything have been, really been made much more consistent. And I think this is kind of been a long-term project. So, and so this is something, a couple takeaways, for me was that, this kind of validated our suspicion and certainly shows what we know to be true, which is that poor sleep quality is really frequently encountered. The other thing that it shows is that the longer you're in the hospital, the worse it is. And so, as much in-hospital care as you try and provide, there's still a lot of opportunity there for sleep disturbances. What about long term? So the other question that is worth asking, of course, is, what about after you're out of the hospital and you've recovered? Okay, so let's say you have an ileal conduit or a neobladder after your cystectomy. How does that influence your sleep compared to before that organ was removed? So this has been looked at in a Norwegian study, which was kind of the largest study that has kind of compared this. It was actually not specifically focused on that question. I thought the findings were kind of interesting. So in this study, about 80% of the patients had the urinary bag or ileal conduit. About a fifth had a neobladder, continent diversion. And they looked at males versus females in the study. There was no statistically significant difference in long-term sleep impact, at least in the study population. And among men, sleep, interestingly, actually improved after surgery. And you wonder if that is really capturing the fact that, the study begins when the patient is diagnosed with bladder cancer and is constantly going to the bathroom, waking up in the middle of the night, and then now that the bladder's removed, their quality improves. So it may not necessarily capture like what life was like before the diagnosis of bladder cancer, but it provides some information, which is interesting. So Bill, coming back to your story, kind of thinking about all of that, how did your surgery experience compare to what we just discussed? I mean, were there particular challenges that you faced in the hospital?
Well, in the actually in the hospital, it was kind of like, well, like you said, you were constantly. It was always somebody that was always coming in the room, and and me kind of coming from that planner world, that you kind of plan everything. I would ask them, okay, why can't you just give me you're the nurse, why don't just give me my pill and take the blood all at the same time versus give me my pill and then you're coming back in here an hour later to take the blood. I could never wrap, and it's just like, I was just falling asleep. And you're back in here, and it's like, it's going to be another 2 hours. I'm going to be just laying here looking up at the ceiling again,
Right.
So that was the big thing. Like I said, in the hospital, it was always, especially being, at Emory, you got, it was like when you would come in, you would kind of like come in with like 5 or 6 other, and it's just like, oh, so now.
Yeah.
So now I'm on display as well, So it's like,
right.
These are a couple of students of mine, Bill. Oh, okay.
Well, that tradition continues. So
it's like, wow.
You've always been a good sport about that. What about communication issues in terms of, did you run into any issues, for example, getting hold of, let's say me or members of the care team?
No, never an issue with, if I had a question, I was always able to get an answer.
Yeah.
So it was that was never communication was never really an issue. Never, I don't think it ever has been for me and you from day one.
Right.
I mean, my wife, she always says it when she comes to the appointment. She always, you two y'all behave. But
yeah.
But no, it's always been the fact that even when I felt like it was maybe be a tough question, you never, you just simply gave me the facts so I could actually make an informed decision. That was one of the things I always admired the most, is that you just gave me the facts.
What about when you, thinking about your discharge, did you get conflicting information or, one thing said by one member of the team and then different things on the piece of paper you got? Was there any issues related to that? Did you feel
No, it was just a matter of after the surgery coming home, then it was a matter of trying to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle, so to say, okay, where do I go from here?
Right.
The home nurse that I had, a young man named Joseph, very informative, and Joseph just kept stressing, you gotta drink water every day. You gotta stay hydrated. You gotta stay hydrated. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I can drink water. And then my wife was like, did you have enough water today? I was like, I'm up to 8 cups. I think but it was the fact that the one time when I didn't have, enough water. And Joseph came over. He could tell right away that
Right.
you didn't drink enough water today. He could tell because I was there, but I was like not there. You know what I mean? And so then I realized, okay, water is the key here to
Yeah.
just being able to just make it each and every day. The other thing that was interesting was that I remember when with the ostomy nurse, she had said, eventually your stoma's going to change. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's going to change. Well, little did I know that, when you come home and you go through the process of figuring out which bag you're going to be using and things of that nature, and you call the supplier because they got it down to a sign. Oh yeah, your insurance company, you can do a 90-day supply. Blah, blah. So I ordered 90-day supply, my first time out the gate. And 30, maybe 40 days in, my wife, she's at work and she calls me and I'm in the bathroom and she could tell it, she could hear it in my voice. What's wrong? It's just not working. The bag's not working. It's like I'm getting 2 to 3 hours out of a bag and I was back leaking again. So it's like, what's going on? And so she's like, did you do this? And I'm thinking, I did everything the same way that I've done it, but today it's not working. And so when I called the manufacturer, and they were like, yeah, and I was explaining to him what's going on, and he's just like, yeah, and he's so calm. He's just like, you know what you need? He says, you need this bag right here. And I'm glad someone knows what I need. But I called them that afternoon about 3 o'clock. The next morning, so it's just a matter of, I got to make it through the night with the bags that I've got. And he gave me some suggestions on putting one of those little like plastic wafers on the bag. I mean, one of the wax wafers. And I did that, and I made it through the night. And the new bag came the next morning, and I was like, whew, got it. So now I call my supplier to get some more bags. And the young lady says, well, Mr. Robertson, if you would have called me, if I'd have took your first call, I'd have told you, don't get a 90-day supply. She said, because it's going to change and things aren't going to work. And I tell you, there is nothing worse is when you'll land there, and it's going to happen if you're just getting started on this journey, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you wake up and you're wet. It's like the worst. I mean, psychologically, it just messes you up that all of a sudden, it's like, I'm wet at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's just like, nothing worse. And it's like, but over time, you learn how to, it's just part of it, it's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
And to the extent that, what was it, my last order last month, I actually had to change bags because here I was 18 months post, and it decided to change again. So it's just like, this little thing is just growing, doing its own thing.
Right.
And I've got to get a different kind of bag or something. It's just like, wow. But once again, those are things that you learn.
Yeah.
Just from going through the process and whatnot. But you just learn and you just keep moving forward because guess what? I'm still here. So it's like that.
One of the things that I just want to sort of call out for everyone in the audience is that, you kind of alluded to some of the resources that you had, which, are part of the things that we intentionally do at Emory, but really have come from patients, such as everyone in this room, sharing with us about things that work. So we usually make it a point to have home health available for every patient and set up for every patient, not just for patients above a certain age, just any patient who had a cystectomy, because you have that additional person that you can talk to. And, it doesn't matter how many discharge instructions you get, to your point, dehydration being one of the extremely common reasons why people come back after cystectomy to the hospital, having someone else kind of reinforce that. The other thing that you highlighted was, having a contact person to assist you with your stoma that you could rely on. And I know there are resources on Beacon's website about that, but they're, reaching out to your doctor, asking for those sorts of things. It sounds like that was helpful for you.
Well, one of the things that I left with Emory is that when I was coming home, you all had quite natural, while in the hospital, I had the stoma nurse coming into the room and things of that nature. Now it's time to get ready to go home. and I've got a one-on-one with my stoma nurse, and she's, because they have showed me how to change the bag and whatnot, but now it's like, okay, you got to change the bag, and I'm like, oh boy, you want me to change the bag? Well, I can tell you something, guys. If you're just about to go through this process, that is something that you're going to want to master as soon as you possibly can. You changing your bag. When I first came home, the wife was there. It was great. But when the wife isn't there and the bag is leaking, I got to figure this thing out. And you will be amazed that as I talk to other people that they still, they're 6 months in and they still haven't figured out how to change their bag. So you really got to overcome that. But the thing that I loved about him is that when I came home, I had like all these different samples of bags so that you can try to actually figure out which one of these products are going to work best for you. And believe, there's more than one way to, the old cliche, one way to skin a cat, well, there's more than one way to bag a stoma, believe it or not.
Yeah.
A lot of different ways that work. So it's like, but
Right.
you got to find what works for you.
Yeah.
That's the key, because what may work for me may not work for you. And, so you find that product that you're happy with and you go with that, and it's kind of interesting because, there's a Facebook group on called Ostomy Awareness, and you can just read these people that are going through, and they'll post something, and rest assured they'll get 60 to 100 different opinions, and I'll be sitting there going, man, apparently their doctor really didn't know what they were doing, because they were just so uninformed, and simple. They're just so uninformed. But granted, I didn't know everything when I first got started, but at least when I came home, I was kind of like semi-equipped that Emory had taken the time to go, this is how you change your bag, and if this has happened, these are the places that you can contact to get information. And that was like, that was great, because I was like stuck.
Just to point out, to be clear, Dr. Narayan and I know nothing about bags, so it is the
Right.
team, right?
Yeah.
The wound nurse.
It's the team.
That they are the real heroes there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to make exactly the same comment to highlight the fact that you mentioned the team that I mentioned to you when we first met, right?
Yeah.
So, you can do I do the surgery the exact same way every single time. But if you don't have that team, I've done it at different hospital systems. If that team is what really takes you from start to finish. And knowing, I think for the group, knowing what those components of that team are and asking your care team to make sure that, some of those pieces are in place. So wound ostomy nurses, home health nursing, right? And then, obviously support for where those resources can be found shortly before you discharge from the hospital are really, really important. I'm curious, was there, before I turn, because I think Dr. Joshi has some slides, we're gonna kind of pivot again, but last question in this segment, was there anything that you experienced, just thinking about when you left the hospital and you got home for the first time after surgery, was there anything you experienced that you wish you had been told before surgery that I didn't go over, or that our team didn't go over? I mean, and if that happened, how and what resources did you use to kind of seek help or get information? You mentioned the Facebook group.
Yeah. The biggest thing for me is if I had to do it all over again,
Right.
would be to be more physically prepared for the surgery. Kind of ironic was that after the surgery, and I was still having some issues with my shoulder, that my primary care provider sent me to physical therapy. So this was like, maybe a month or 2, 3 months after surgery?
Right.
Y'all?
You're alluding to the fact that you had 2 surgeries. You had
Right.
kidney surgery first, and then
the
we did the
bladder
surgery.
After the bladder surgery,
Right.
I wound up going to physical therapy. Well, while in physical therapy for my shoulder,
Right.
lo and behold, cause some of the exercises for the midsection improved my overall movement. And I was just like, so what I'd asked, me and you were talking about, why don't y'all do physical therapy after the surgery? Because I found it beneficial. And he was like, well, right now it's just not in the game plan. Right. And I just thought, and when the first time me and Stephanie talked, I was telling her about it, I don't understand it. It would be so beneficial because
Right.
I just happened to be a coincidence that I was able to go through physical therapy. So if I had to do it all over again, I wish I would prefer to be able to do something like that before surgery.
Sure.
So that the recovery process would not be as bad. Because believe me, when you do that incision down through that gut like that, and
Yeah.
that's rough, man. That's rough. So yeah.
And you're alluding to a whole world of what some people are we're all working on as a community. Some of you may have heard this terminology, prehab, where we're working on some of that to try and improve your strength and muscle mass and everything, because after that surgery you take a hit, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You take a hit. Not only physically, but mentally.
Yep.
It's
Thanks for
well,
jumping
you know,
in.
yeah. But mentally, like I say, you're dealing with, as you know, you hear the C word, and now I'm kind of one of those individuals when people go, the C word, I go, what, cancer? It's because it's just a fact of life. It's just part of my life. And I tell people, it says, it's kind of interesting that I became like my own little mayor of my little village of support. It was kind of like when I first started calling everyone and letting everyone know what I was going through. And now what has happened is that I have friends that knew what I've gone through, and they've got friends that are just now starting to go through, and they'll go, you need to call this guy and have a conversation with him. And so I'm starting to help other people through the process. And I'll sit and I'll tell people, says, it's like,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I try to tell people, there are going to be days that you're going to feel like you want to give up, but you can't give up, because I tell them other people are still relying on you, so you can't give up. So it's like you get to a crossroad, and I go, and when you get to this crossroad, you got to make a decision. You got to get busy living, or you're going to get busy dying. That's just, and they kind of look at you, go, I said, there is no in between. You either live or you're dying. And that's like, so when you first started with the surviving versus thriving thing, I'm like, this is my place right here, because those are the lines, those are the things I used to tell people when I was reading, with my sales team. I was like, we either, it's feast or famine. We either like we're selling and we're all making a lot of money, or we all just broke as broke can be. But it's like, because there's no in between.
Right.
So with this mentally, you've got to figure out a way to push through each and every day, because every day that you get up, it's like, today's a new opportunity. Today's a new opportunity. So now it's kind of like I take the approach that today's a new opportunity to make a difference in someone else's life. And with that attitude, it gives me a reason to want to keep on keeping on. So you tell me what's going on. Oh man, let me tell you what I went through, because I've been there, done that, but there is life on the other side of this. There really is, and it's quite rewarding. It's quite rewarding. So get involved.
Yeah.
Help as you go through. Help other people go through, because you really. I have to give women. I have to applaud y'all, because as I look, doing all my research, and I could find, women that y'all band together, y'all share with one another, and y'all help. Men, on the other hand. Fellas, we suffer alone, and we shouldn't. We should be there for one another. One of the things that I found that in the world as a truck driver, moving windmill blades, I was like at the top of that's like the top of the food chain in the world of trucking. We are at the top of the food chain, but to get there, I didn't get there on my own. I got there because other guys that were at that point brought me along. They showed me what it took to get there. So with this battle with cancer, if we've survived, we need to be willing to show other people how to survive. And that's because I'm convinced when the mind gives up, the body gives up, and it's over.
Yeah. That's true.
I couldn't ask for a better segue, so
Okay.
thank you. Yeah. I mean,
Am I done then?
how y'all doing? You still hanging in there with us? Bill, hey, round of applause for Bill for really, I mean, just what an awesome story. All right, so I will go through this relatively quickly. I want to highlight some of this stuff. This is the tip of the iceberg, and I want to share a little bit about kind of our journey at our institution of some of the stuff we've looked at in this. I'm by no means even the regional expert. They're national experts in a lot of this stuff, and you just all had Dr. Smith, come and talk, who's done just a tremendous work on all of this. And so I want to share a little bit of what we do. So, I when I look at this, I like to think about survivorship on a broader scale, right? There's tremendous work being done on surveys and everything like that, but how do we look at the wide distribution of bladder cancer patients throughout the country and answer difficult questions about what is the scale of the problem here? And one of the things that I've actually been lucky to have access with at Emory is this huge insurance database set. And that's important, right? Because bladder cancer patients, all cancer patients, get most of their care managed and paid for through some form of insurance, be it through a commercial claims insurance, Blue Cross, Advantage, all that kind of stuff, or through Medicare eligible patients, right? And so we look at a national patient population and we try and match these cohorts. And we're lucky to have the access to that because we can look at tens of thousands of patients. And so I was very interested in looking at what impact does a bladder cancer diagnosis have in general on mental health after the diagnosis. So we were able to capture the time of diagnosis for over 66,000 patients throughout the country over the course of about a decade. And what we were looking to do was, okay, let's make it clean. At the time of diagnosis, we didn't want them to have any previous recorded event of anxiety or major depressive disorder or active psychiatric medication use, because that's common in the population, but we wanted to know what effect or what correlation does having a diagnosis have on the longitudinal outcome of mental health from the time of diagnosis. And so we were able to do that. We were able to publish this in Cancer Medicine. I was very proud of this paper, and this is kind of how we did it. And what I would really like to highlight, don't worry about all this data here, but just down at the bottom, the cases. We had 30,000 on the commercial claims and 30,000 in Medicare, and we were able to control those, characteristic for characteristic, men, women, comorbidities, race, age, all this kind of stuff. So 30,000 controls in each of those. So we can actually look and compare what happens to someone who doesn't have this diagnosis and what happens to someone who does. I like graphs just because it's just the real visual here. So I'm just going to explain it simply. The blue line are patients who were diagnosed with bladder cancer, and the y-axis, so that's time 0, and on the bottom there you say 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. The yellow line are controls. And so this is just simply a diagnosis. Don't worry about the A and B. Those are the two different. That's the commercial claims insurance, and that's the Medicare insurance on the other side. But what do you see? Immediately, at 6 months after the diagnosis, the patients who were diagnosed, that blue line, immediately have a higher incidence of a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, or the use of a psychiatric medication. That line separates at 6 months, immediately afterwards, and continues on and continues to separate over the course of 36 months. And we stopped at 36 months. We were like, wow, this is already showing us a story. Well, let's break that down even further. So again, blue line is the patients diagnosed with bladder cancer. Yellow line are the controls. Those triangles, if you could see that well enough, are female patients, and the circles are male patients. Well, we actually know that in general in the population, if you just follow everyone, women tend to have a higher incidence of psychiatric diagnoses over time. We don't know exactly why that is. There's many possible theories. I mean, we're urologists, right? I mean, psychiatrists have their own world that they research this kind of stuff. So this wasn't actually surprising to the psychiatrist who was working with us on this project. But what we noticed is that, yeah, I mean, this bears out over here as well. Not only do women tend to have worse psychiatric outcomes, but, if they had that diagnosis, it was really bad. So this is something to really keep in mind for us as providers, right? As we're counseling new patients and making sure that the resources are available. And lastly, I want to share this graph because this is also meaningful. This is breaking it down, and the yellow line is the control line. This is breaking it down by the type of treatment that they ultimately ended up getting. So again, this is from the time of diagnosis. If you had a radical treatment, what do we mean by that? Having your bladder removed, getting full chemotherapy, or maybe getting chemotherapy with radiation. That's that worst line up at the top, that dark blue triangle line. You know, they are the patients that ended up having the worst outcomes with psychiatric disorders. And what I mean by that is not disorders. It's not bad to have it, but right, major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, needing to use medications. This is the tip of the iceberg. These are, remember what the database that we are using here. We're using an insurance database, so they actually had to have gone to a doctor, gotten a diagnosis, given medication, or gotten therapy in order for that line, that code to be written in that insurance database somewhere for us to find it. This is the tip of the iceberg. How many patients are out there that never got that diagnosis, that never actually went and saw or talked to their doctor about it, but are suffering with it, right? Yeah. So this is the fact that this is actually even documented, and it's showing this.
And these are patients with insurance.
With insurance too,
yeah,
right?
That's the other part.
Yeah, it's, and good insurance. You know, actually, right. this database is. So that's really remarkable. So what did we learn? I mean, I learned that, you know, obviously we thought this, we believed we knew this, we've seen it in multiple surveys, but from a broader national perspective, bladder cancer patients were more likely to develop new onset depression and anxiety, almost twice as likely at 6 months, and that persisted at 36 months. Women and those receiving cystectomy chemotherapy were far more likely to develop these, and you know, those were lasting beyond 36 months, which I think is very meaningful. This has been looked at with many researchers in the past in different ways. Dr. Smith, you know, like led this trial, the impact on health-related quality of life using surveys. Many people have tried to attack this and measure this from different angles, and I think that, great, we're measuring it. What are we going to do about it, right? Yeah. That's the next step. This is, look, I mean, this is not just a problem because obviously having depression, having anxiety, that's a problem, of course, that's a problem in and of itself. But this actually impacts actual cancer care. This was a wonderful paper demonstrating that elderly patients with muscle-invasive bladder cancer and who already had a pre-existing mental health disorder were less likely to receive guideline concordant management and led to poor overall and disease-specific survival. That's wild. You know, those are the patients that probably need the most help. And you know, why is that? Is that because there's still a taboo around mental health? Is it, you know, is it that they're not seeking care? Is it that because of those challenges they aren't able to make it to appointments and they were never recognized as needing extra resources to help them to get there? It's a black box, and I think that we need to be really looking into this a lot more. You know, we talked about the framework of how we do. One of the other things that I was interested in looking at, and this was something that was not really on our radar when I was training. You know, I trained across the street here. I'm an alumnus of Vanderbilt University here in Nashville. It was a very storied urology program, very, you know, fantastic folks doing amazing work in bladder cancer as well. But this was before we realized the ravaging effects of opioids that we're having in our communities. And I remember, you know, as an intern, you know, we would do just the simplest small little biopsy out of the bladder, and I'd give, you know, 30 Percocets, you know, to send home with, and that was normal. We good intention. We didn't want pain, right? Well, man, we didn't realize just how much of an effect that was having in the community. Where were those pills going? What was happening to our patients who we were giving it to, right? And so, you know, it's bladder cancer, as you all know, it's considered one of the most onerous solid organ malignancies, cost, length of treatment, surveillance, morbidity, and so many different points in time that you can be exposed to opioids, you know, at the time of symptoms, at the time of treatments, and, you know, throughout all of that. And so we asked, what association does that initial dose that these patients are getting have in the development of prolonged opioid use, because that is a big health concern. And so we were able to publish this recently, and proud of this work as well. You know, same sort of thing. We were able to find, you know, patients that had never been prescribed opioids. And how do we know that? Because they had good insurance. We were looking and seeing if they were being charged for opioids, right? And so we said, okay, you know, they have a bladder cancer diagnosis. They had not previously received opioids. Let's see what happens after their diagnosis. I'm sorry about the kind of fuzziness of this, but, you know, the key takeaway, I think, is just glaring at you, is that if you were prescribed an initial opioid dose, it doesn't even matter how many, at the time of your first TURBT when you were diagnosed for bladder cancer, you were way more likely to be continuing using that at 3 to 6 months later.
Wow.
Almost than anything else there. You see,
Wow.
you see how far over that is. Now look, we don't want, this isn't a talk about like, let's not treat pain, right? But I mean, it's important to know like what effect are the medicines we're prescribing having on patients. And it's actually, I highlight this because we learned our lesson. You know, if you were doing this in earlier years, you were prescribing way more. If you're doing a TURBT nowadays, you're not giving 30 Percocets out, right? And so, you know, over the years, this has improved. But it's not just getting any, it's the amount that you're getting that obviously matters. We broke it down into quartiles. That quartile 4 is when you're receiving, those patients were receiving a lot more. And you can actually just take my word for it that you can look at that those numbers, 1.43, 1.55, 1.95. The more opioid you got at that first TURBT, you know, the far more likely it is based on the number you got to be taking it down the road. And so it's dependent. It's a dose-related dependence. Treatment type also matters. And so, you know, this is just kind of the patients who ultimately ended up getting way more opioids. Like, so what I was saying, the way we measure opioids is oral morphine equivalents, OMEs. So like, there's so many different types that we try and standardize it. And so if you were getting way above average, that 150 or more, you were just way more likely to continue using it down the road. And actually, look, 15% of patients who underwent or who ended up with the radical therapy got above that median of 150. I mean, that's a lot of Percocets or Vicodins or something like that. I mean, that's a lot of patients getting a lot of heavy doses. Again, need to treat pain, but got to be careful. And you know, I think that's meaningful for us to make sure we're not harming patients. What did we learn? We learned that those who filled an opioid prescription, the initial TURBT, had greater odds of persistent use. The quartile, the amount that you got mattered, and that if you're going to go on to radical therapy, you're likely going to be exposed the most, and so we really have to watch out for any implications that has, and that, you know, men and women have similar rates. We're running out of time.
Giving you guys 15 minutes.
Yes, okay.
Q&A.
Perfect.
Oh,
Yeah, we are.
perfect.
I'm going to be finishing up real quick. This is, I think, one of my last slides here, which is that, you know, all of that is important, but I mean, look, there's just such a broad range of things that we need to talk about. It's impossible to cover it all in this, and let's importantly make a shout out to the world of sexual health and bladder cancer. Right, this wonderful paper done with this European group talking about the quality of life after bladder cancer in these surveys, and looking at, you know, all these different domains and such a problem with sexual function for men and for women. That, you know, this needs to be brought up to the doctor, and doctors need to initiate that conversation. I'm not going to go real into detail here, but just to say, yeah, let's open up that conversation, you know, because that's clearly extraordinarily important for men and for women. We're working on a whole bunch of things. Dr. Smith has spoken about that cysto study, and so, you know, different ways to help improve the outcome there. Oh, no, I wanted to show that slide. Can we go back to that last slide? This is amazing. Look at this. This is what you're driving.
That's what we did for a living. Yeah, that was what we did.
So I want time for Q&A, but yeah, I know, right? Can we just talk about that, actually? You know, I think before, you know, there's a lot of questions here, but I want to just maybe just at the end talk about some of that mental health stuff, right? I mean, I think that I saw a lot of nodding heads. Did you ever, you know, and this is a personal question, so feel free to just answer it how you wish. Did you ever think about, you know, asking or seeking mental health support?
Actually, I did, as a matter of fact, because as you as you start to go through this and you start to like reflect on just other things in life in general, and you begin to reflect on some of the things that that are actually taking place in my life while I was in the military, dealing with a lot of different situations and things of that nature, that you begin to revisit those things. And so, and my wife has suggested, well, why don't you go down and have a talk with the VA? And so when I did, so I went down, I had a talk with our local VA, and they actually wound up putting me in contact with the counselor, and we would actually have conversations, every month, just how you doing and how, and she was like, okay, we've got to find, and she figured it out. She was just like, what you need is that you've got to get involved in something because because just sitting around doing nothing is like the worst that you could ever do. So I discovered that, so after talking with her and then after talking with a buddy of mine, he was like, you know what, Bill, you need to go figure out a way how to help other people. And in helping other people, it was kind of like, okay, I can make it, because it was always kind of one of those things that when I was in the military and dealing with the things that I used to deal with then, even then, the guys on the team was always, they called me Robbie. Robbie, you got to have the answer, because if Robbie ain't got an answer, then we're toast. And I'm gonna have an answer, because failure wasn't an option. So it was like, yeah, we're gonna come up with a solution. So with that, that's what kind of like got me going back to some normalcy in life. It's the fact that, by not sitting around just staying idle-minded, all you're doing then is just thinking about the cancer. All you're doing then is just thinking about the recovery and thinking, let's get my mind off of this and let's start focusing on other things. And what I found was that helping other people got me there. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that, being proactive about, finding a counselor, right?
Yeah.
That can help you guide that. So
So
we have about 10 minutes left, and we can obviously have pepper Bill with a million more questions, but I want to open it up and have time for us to be able to answer anything that you specifically have.
And for you guys to pepper Bill.
And yeah, you please.
Well, Bill's going to be here the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
You're not leaving, so we got plenty of time with Bill. But I saw a lot of head bobs. I mean, y'all look like those little things on the front of a car. Like you're all going like this the whole time with everything, with the sleep deprivation, with the mental health, with the support, with all of those challenges. What questions do you have? Raise your hands if you got a question, and we got the microphones ready to go.
It's coming behind you.
Here comes one. It's coming up.
I am now, let's see, I'm 19 months post now, cancer-free, 19 months. Yeah.
Got another.
A couple questions.
Yep.
Patricia, got a question?
I found your presentation to be just fabulous. Thank you so much. I was under the care of a psychiatrist at my cancer center from the get-go, and she saved my life as much as my surgeon did. But there were still problems getting them integrated during my surgery. And have you encountered that? Do you have any suggestions for how, that I would say, I need Ativan. And they're like, well, we'll give you pain medication. I'm like, no, call my psychiatrist. She's right across the street. No, that's not really what we do here. So do you have suggestions for how those services can work better together? And this is a side note. My son just graduated from Emory in psychiatry. Did his residency there. He spent a lot of time at Grady, so I was really
Oh, that's awesome. That's
awesome.
really
That's
great.
great. Yeah, that's
Congratulations.
wonderful.
Well, you bring up a really interesting question, which is sort of the difference between in-hospital psychiatric care and outpatient psychiatric care, which is a very tricky, it shouldn't be, but it is somewhat challenging to navigate. And I think that, we obviously have to do a better job of it as a surgical group. And part of the reason why Dr. Joshi, put together that presentation with kind of highlighting that is to highlight and provide evidence supporting, why this is actually a problem. And, together with that data and with a lot of the anecdotal experience that we have, essentially we have to put together programs that help integrate that. I think it's helpful. My suggestion for what you can do today when you're seeing your doctor, particularly if you have already sought care for mental health after your diagnosis, is to bring that up beforehand and just explain to your care team before you have surgery, look, this is a really important part of my health as well, and we need to have that addressed proactively. You probably almost everybody in this room probably has asked the question about postoperative pain. How's that managed? But very rarely or infrequently do patients bring up the question of, sort of their psychiatric care. So from our end, increased education, increased research on this to inform kind of the practitioners about how important it is. But then on your end, to sort of advocate again for yourself by bringing that up, I think is sort of the strategy. But it's a great point.
And knowing a little bit about the terminology, so many cancer centers may not use the term just psychiatry, especially if it's a cancer diagnosis. We have a team called supportive oncology, and it also goes by palliative oncology, palliative care. We put them in different bins, and sometimes people think about that as end of life, but it's not at all. It's about your mental health and overall well-being. And so, kind of knowing that, asking around, like, what are the resources and what are the terminologies that are used for that, I think, it's something that people don't know to ask, right? So.
Yeah, great question. Yeah.
Bill, how long were you in the hospital for your surgery, and did you have a choice between the bag and the neo-bladder, and could the doctors comment on what criteria is used to determine those choices?
Let's see, let's kind of walk it through. You got to look at, I did 9 surgical procedures in the course of like 10 months. So it was just constant. So by the time that I got to Dr. Narayan, believe me, going back into another operating room, I was wearing thin. So I was kind of like, what are my options? And the big deciding factor for me was when he said, okay, we could do this another 5 more times, but chances are in 2 years, you're back to square one. I wasn't gonna go, that wasn't an option for me. That was like, nope, I ain't doing that, because I didn't want to go through this again. So it was like, what else are my options? And he told me, having your bladder removed. Okay, let's do it. It's just because of the fact that I was thinking along the line that if I can get it out, I can make it through. I just got to get it out. If I can get it out, then I can make it from that point on. And that was a big driving force. I mean,
Bill, do you remember how many days you were in the hospital?
I was in after the surgery, we were there 7 days now? About a week? Yeah, after the bladder.
That's how long I was in,
Yeah.
On average.
Yeah, it's usually, I think we average about 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, about 5 to 7 days.
To kind of touch on the question about neo-bladder versus the bag. So in Bill's case, one of the limiting factors was the fact that he'd had a kidney removed. And so when you have kind of lower renal function as a result, reduced renal function as a result of a prior nephrectomy, neo-bladder it's not necessarily contraindicated, but we call it a relative contraindication in the sense that because the connection we make with the remaining kidney to the continent bladder is a refluxing anastomosis. What that means is urine is allowed to go back and forth between the neo-bladder and the kidney. Whereas in the way your normal anatomy works is urine kind of always sort of drains forward, doesn't really bounce back. Many of you probably have heard of this term hydronephrosis, which is the swelling in the kidney. A lot of people have mild hydronephrosis that's normal after. So we worry a little bit about renal deterioration in a neobladder. And so that was one of the reasons why I was sort of steering Bill away from that. We had that conversation. I'm not sure, you might not recall that detail. Other considerations, of course, I think are the fact that a neobladder does require a little bit more maintenance in terms of post-operative care as well as kind of long-term management. There is risk of nighttime incontinence, meaning leakage of urine, which some people are not prepared for or maybe don't want to deal with. And then you also have to be okay catheterizing yourself periodically sometimes to kind of rinse it out, clear it of mucus, that sort of thing. Which makes folks a little bit, I know you use the fish hook analogy. In men, the prostate is kind of the big problem when you're cathing yourself. So because the prostate is removed, it's actually not all that painful necessarily, but you can sometimes develop strictures afterwards. And so there, again, if the idea of cathing yourself is, like a no-go, then a neobladder, may not be the best option. So those are some of the considerations. There's other things you can get into.
That's a whole talk by itself.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just to hopefully that answers that question at least somewhat.
Bill, well, I'm thrilled to be alive and grateful.
Where you at? Where's your hand?
Right here.
Okay, here you are.
I am really, and I'm trying, I know envy's a sin, but I am envious of how many times you said your team. I had my cancer in Austin and surgery in San Antonio. I never had that team collaboration
Yeah.
despite good oncologist, good surgeon, good primary care. How many major, does everybody have a team at every major hospital? We don't have it in Austin.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, we're not allowed to comment on
Yeah. It takes intention, right? You know, it takes intention from people to build that sort of thing. But even though we have teams, so many of our patients come from 4 or 5 hours away, and we need to coordinate care with local doctors.
Right.
And that team is disjointed, right? And so it's not always going to be great for even all of our patients. And Bill had a good experience. I can tell you, I'll be honest, right? Some of my patients don't have a good experience with that, despite our best efforts, and so it's hard.
Yeah.
Just 2 quick questions. You mentioned the lung too originally, but you never elaborated. You had the kidney spot on the
I had a
kidney, you
spot. The spot on my
lung.
on the lung turned out to be non-cancerous. It was just scar tissue from an old military injury.
Okay, and secondly, just making sure that the tumor that was on the kidney was bladder cancer, so you were stage 4?
No, actually, it was renal cell carcinoma. So it was Bill actually has had 2 cancers. Actually,
Yeah.
he also had incidentally found prostate cancer
Yeah.
as well. So he's had 3 cancers.
Told you I was a train wreck. Train wreck.
No, so he had renal cell it turned out that he had renal cell carcinoma of the kidney, which is completely unrelated to the bladder cancer.
Bill, this one's for you. As a veteran as well, why did you choose commercial side versus the VA? Was there a reason, or?
Well, it just kind of boiled down to that being in Atlanta, the VA hospital there, it's massive. But I just felt that I would get better service at the commercial facility versus the VA. And that's why I made that choice, yeah. Yeah, that's why I made that choice.
Okay. This has been phenomenal. Thank you all so
Thank
much
you.
for driving down.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill, appreciate it.
Thanks so much.